Hi, and welcome back to another White Noise Halloween special episode. If you've enjoyed the episodes that we've released so far, or if this is the first one that you're seeing or hearing and you've really enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Spotify, Instagram, Twitter, so you get notified when we post, because we're posting 7 episodes to celebrate Halloween. And today, we're hoping it's going to be a mini-sode. That may change. You'll know better than us. But we are talking about, probably saw from the title, why we stopped watching American Horror Story. We have a lot to say about American Horror Story, Ryan Murphy in general. We will be touching on the Dharma conversation that's been going on. Not much, because we don't really want to feed into it, but it's hard to talk about Ryan Murphy creations without talking about the one that everybody is talking about right now. So yeah. I think we're just going to go through and just talk about the seasons in order. The first thing I think I need to address, though, is that this title for me is kind of a lie. I have seen every season of American Horror Story at least once, but there were really pinnacle points where I stopped watching it for a lot of reasons. For me, I should actually probably just call this "Why Can't I Stop Watching It?" because I don't even like it anymore. And I feel like there's probably a lot of people that feel similar, like people that watch it every time it comes out, get excited for a new season, but then are like bitterly disappointed. We know we're going to be bitterly disappointed. So why do we keep going?
Honestly, I think it's one of those things where people become so used to like a certain creator's tone. It's the same reason, people tend to like go back to Marvel movies a lot. Like, you know what to expect, you know what's coming. You even know the same actors are going to turn up because Ryan
That's really
Murphy has
true. Yeah.
Evan Peters chained up in a dungeon somewhere. So, you watch an American Horror Story season kind of prepared and ready, and it's not like a lot of other anthology shows because it as much as it can be a completely different story, the tone is pretty much the same. Like, yes, some seasons are a little bit darker, some are a bit more comedic, some are a bit more like social commentary vibes, you know the one I'm talking about. But like, you still know, you kind of know the beats each season's going to take. I'm pretty sure they all have like the same amount of episodes. They all have like 10 episodes or something.
I didn't check that actually, but I
I'm
couldn't
pretty
say.
sure, at least when I stopped watching, which was around Hotel, so I got about 5 seasons in before I gave up on it. Yeah, I think they're all about the same length as well, so there's a
I
template.
think for us, and again, a lot of people around our age, or like a bit older, will agree. I hate to say it, but American Horror Story kind of raised us for a long
Oh,
time,
don't.
because I didn't realize how young we were when the first
Mm,
season came out, because I
mm,
remember really vividly when the season got advertised. So like the first season, Murder House, came out in 2011. These dates are, to the best of my knowledge, they could maybe be slightly out, but I think they're pretty accurate. So it came out in 2011. I remember seeing the advert for it, and the thing that caught my eye was from the creators of Glee. And I was like,
yeah.
huh? So I watched it. I remember watching it with my dad. This was another thing, like it then became like a weekly thing that me and my dad watched together up
Mhm.
until a point, and then I'm pretty sure we stopped watching it
I mean, there's
together.
some content in that show where it's like, maybe I shouldn't watch that with
Which,
my dad.
pre American Horror Story, you didn't know was going to happen, because nobody,
Mm,
like from the first season, no one knew how it was going to go. Even, if you had seen stuff Ryan Murphy had done before,
mhm.
nothing like this. So we were probably about 15 when it came out, and to think about like being 15 and watching the things that were in that and the content that was in it, fucked up.
Yeah, definitely. And, we talk a lot on this podcast, as I'm sure regular listeners know, about resensitization. You kind of go back to those first few seasons now and you're like, oh, yeah, like that's a lot for like a TV show, like a weekly syndicated TV show. And this is before streaming. Like, with streaming, you can get
Yeah.
away with a lot, because you don't have to worry about the watershed or anything. They just stick it onto their service. The fact that they got away with some of the stuff in season 1 amazes me. Like, episode 1 of season 1, something happens towards the end of the episode, which I how did that get on TV? I don't understand.
I think just you bringing up how like streaming changed everything, and I think this is also even where, because I think we both stopped watching it, me for the first time around the same season. But I think so much that the first few seasons, because they all are exploitative. They get
Yeah,
worse,
all of it.
but
Yeah.
they all are exploitative. They all have very distressing and disturbing
Mhm.
storylines and characters and things like that. But when you're not watching them one after the other, you you can kind of convince yourself that it isn't as bad and as intense as you think. Whereas now, even though I'm sure they do still get released week to week, most people wait. I mean, I can't remember the last time I watched one of the series week to week. It had to be one of the earlier seasons. Because then after that, they were just all released, and I did just watch them one after the other. And it just made it so much worse because there was no, like, there's no safety episode. There's no episode that I could rely on to be like, okay, this one's going to be a break.
Calmer. There's no lull later on, is there, at all? Even in season 1, I feel like you know, towards the middle, it like there's like some shocking bits, but it kind of calms down because the beginning and the end are so like fuck, aren't they? I would say Coven is kind of similar in that way, where it's like, you know, lulls a bit in the middle. Asylum probably, maybe less so, but yeah, those early seasons you could rely on, like, you know, it understanding its pacing, and like that's why it was so popular. You know, it blew up on Tumblr. It was more approachable, whereas I feel like later on it just kind of kept hammering, and not even in a good way, because it had less like memorable scenes.
I think it was also kind of a sign of the time in the sense that it did come out in 2011. Things like that t-shirt, Normal People Scare Me, which I'm sure, Liana, you had. It was everywhere. And also I really wanted one. I just never got one.
Have you seen all the comparisons now? The Hellfire Club is the new Normal People Scare Me t-shirt.
Oh my god, I didn't think about it like that.
It's so true.
But it's true. So I think overall, the first season is still held as most people's favorite season. It is still one of mine.
It's
like,
got
there
a
are
fantastic, consistent tone to it that I would say, like,
it
don't get me
does.
wrong, I have my other favorite seasons, but like, just the first season is the most realized. You know what I mean?
Also, I think is untainted from the Ryan Murphy curse. Like, I think because it was the first one that did what it kind of did. I just feel like as the seasons went on, they lost whatever that season originally had. And I just also remember I didn't realize just how consistently this show has been released. I thought that there was like 2 years between each one. I definitely thought there was 2 or 3 years between the first and second season, because I remember, I don't think I knew it was an anthology when the first season came out. So I remember it ended and I was like, oh, okay, will there be another season? And then when there was, and it was something totally different, I was like, what? But to me, I was like, I thought it just disappeared. And then Asylum came out in 2012, and it was between 2012 and then carried on in 2013. So maybe that's why I also thought there was a bit longer between it, because it was later on in the year.
That's true.
But then obviously that one came out and it was a completely different storyline, which this is probably gonna, like, I know it's like a lot of people's favorite season as well. For me, it's one of my least favorite, which we have spoken about briefly on our Summer of Aliens episode. It was probably one of the most horrific. Like, I don't know.
Definitely. Like, it doesn't necessarily show more than other seasons, but like the content matter and the tone
much
of it
more
is
disturbing.
like, especially considering that in that time period, for some reason, so much horror was focused on like mental asylums and institutions. It just, that felt incredibly exploitative. You know, it doesn't sit the same way as it did. And part of the problem is that, like, I'm sure the creators knew how well AHS did on Tumblr, and obviously Tumblr's obsessed with all that kind of content. So, you know, people constantly posting about Girl Interrupted and Shutter Island and stuff. So, like, it just made sense that the second season would be like an exploitative look at like mental illness in horror. And some people loved that, but like, you know, I liked it at the time, but I'm sure if I go back and watch it now, I will literally find it unbearable and like won't even be able to watch it.
Well, have you watched like any of the seasons recently?
Not recently. So I used to kind of I think we did a similar thing where we just used to watch them on repeat. You know, they were cranking the seasons out. We were fucking cranking the rewatches out. But like, I don't think I felt an impulse to watch it in years. And I think it's because it was such a specific moment in time. You know, it was such a like lightning bolt, wasn't it? Those first like how many would I say? The first 3 or 4 seasons came out at the right time, the right kind of audience and everything. And I feel like as soon as that moment left, I just no longer felt the impulse to watch it at all.
Imagine if they had just done like the first 3 or 4 seasons. I
It
really
would
think
go down well remembered, I would say.
it really would have done. Like they
Yeah.
just fucked themselves over by continuing to go. And then obviously considering, and we'll get to it when we get to that season, but the hotel is when most people dropped off. It was just like
Yes.
how I actually didn't expect it to continue after that. I don't
Yeah.
know how it's still going on
No.
because I can't
It's
remember the last time people really enjoyed watching it.
it makes me think of The Walking Dead. Like, it's just clinging on for
Yeah.
dear life. And it's just like,
Mhm.
I think Walking Dead's finally admitted defeat, hasn't it? Isn't it
I
ending? It's
think
the
I think
last
it has.
season.
But you know what? The Walking Dead was another one for me. For ages, I just kept watching it and kept watching it and kept watching it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even say why, because I admit it's like the same story, the same thing happens all the time.
Yeah.
With American Horror Story, it was the exact same thing. Just because you changed the costumes and the setting, it
Yes.
didn't change the fact that they always had
Yeah.
the same storyline.
Exactly the same, all the same story beats. And this is a Ryan Murphy thing because seasons of Glee can kind of fall into that. You know, that was a big criticism, wasn't it, of like seasons 2 and 3, was that they kind of followed the structure of season 1. But like in that, it's inevitable, you know, they're like preparing for a competition. Whereas like in a horror show, why do you have to have the same beats? You know, and then it's even more obvious because you've got that same cast. I am a massive fan of the same cast thing. I think it's fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
It's like a theatre troupe, isn't it? But I know for a lot of people they actually got quite sick of that, didn't they, later on? And
What
that's
the
why I think
cast did.
yeah, well, yeah. There was a mix up within the cast, wasn't there? Like some
Yeah.
faces left and some joined, which was good. But I actually kind of think that happened a little bit too late.
I also feel like once your original cast start to drop off, like a few will happen here or there, but once they start to drop off, you need to step back and think, okay, is this show really worth
I
pushing
agree.
on with?
Like, it's so funny to me that Evan Peters, he will just be like that, you know, he is by Ryan Murphy's side till he dies. It's nuts.
True.
Who has come back?
What, in the
Obviously,
later seasons?
yeah, I'm just trying to think. Like Lily Rabe, she hasn't been in it a while, has she? Or has she been in recent ones?
I think the last one she was in was Roanoke. I feel
Oh, that
like
was a
she
while ago,
may have
yeah.
I think she may have reprised her character from Asylum at one point. I could be totally wrong, but I
Got you.
think she did. It might have been in 1984.
Okay, got
So
you.
she might have been like a guest in
Yeah.
that one, but I
See,
think that was it.
I never watched 1984, but it's the only one that really got my interest in the last few years because
It did a lot
it
of
had
people.
more viral moments.
Yeah.
You know, like there were way more gift sets again, and it felt like being back on Tumblr. And it kind of caught my eye because it seemed to just do what the earlier seasons did and have fun with a concept.
It looked like it did. It
Yeah.
didn't.
Did it not?
No.
Oh, I may have
It
to watch.
as usual, we're not sticking to a chronological order of stuff, but
We
for
try.
me, honest, 1984 is actually a really good example of, hotel aside, pretty much all of the seasons, I always really liked the beginning. I thought the beginnings were really, really good. And then it was kind of like, it feels like Ryan Murphy can't write endings.
See, right, I would have to disagree because some endings I've really enjoyed. For me, a big problem has been like the not necessarily the actual ending, but like the last third as a
Yeah.
whole. Do you know what I mean? It feels very much like he does a J.K. Rowling and has his beginning in mind, has his end in mind, and he can get there, and then he cannot figure out, you know, everything's spreading out. He can't figure how to tie it all back in again.
I think he relies way too much on the fact that it's an anthology series. So it's like, it doesn't have to. Well, to me, if it's an anthology series, it should have a tidy ending. I'm not saying that
Yeah,
it
they
should
should all be
be
tied with a bow a bit.
solved or anything, but you should be able to definitely go, even if it's an ambiguous ending.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the ending of season 1.
Yeah. No, I
Everything.
completely agree. Like, you don't have to resolve, you can leave things ambiguous and up to your viewers, but you still have to be like, boom, this is the bookend to it. This is the ending, you know?
But then the problem is, the one season that really did do that, he fucked with, because Murder House has been reused 3 times since it
See,
ended.
this is the Marvelification of American Horror Story and Marvelification of like most stuff in general. I don't understand people's need for characters to pop up in other stories, especially in an anthology series where the same actors play different characters. It doesn't make sense, and it's so frustrating to me.
It
As soon as
worked,
I
I
heard that
think.
characters were going to pop up, I lost any remaining interest I had in American Horror Story.
I think it worked maybe the first time that they tried to do it, because it was kind of funny. It was kind of funny having these characters that you knew were played by the same actors.
Itself, blah blah blah. But then to make like a regular thing out of that is cheap, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So not a fan.
So getting slightly back on track, and you know, just with Asylum, at least for me, Asylum's actually the first time I only really just remember this, but Asylum's the first time I stopped watching. Because again, I think on it and I'm like, why did I stop watching at this point? Because I've seen so much worse since then. Have to remember, I was probably about 15, 16 when the second season came out. I hadn't really seen that much yet as it comes to film. You changed that for me a lot with all the films that you lent me. But it was literally the storyline, I think, of Evan Peters' character was like about to get sterilized, and I was like, because I knew how just visual and like visually disturbing these could be, I was like, I don't want to see that, so I stopped watching it. And then ironically, when I came back to it again, I thought I came back to it years later. I didn't. I must have come back to it like literally the next year, or possibly a couple of years after, but that was irrelevant because they never actually went through with it anyway. But then the thing that did almost put me off it again was the Anne Frank story that was in it.
Why was it needed?
There's so much where, like, this is why like debating Ryan Murphy and his choices when it comes to like writing and stuff like that is interesting, because he argued it was because it was meant to be a representation of, at the time, there were a lot of women claiming that they were Anne Frank, and it was meant to tie in like that kind of historical element, because in at least the first few seasons there were historical elements thrown into it, you know, like true crime stuff, and just events in history. There are some parts of it I like, because I kind of like when you have, so for example, the whole season of Roanoke, which is debated between people who enjoyed the show. Like, some people think it's the worst season. It's actually one of my favorite. I really liked the format. I like how it changed. I think especially because after Hotel, it changed and they rethought it. And at first I thought it was like the rebirth of American Horror Story. It wasn't. But that one took a mysterious moment in history and gave it an answer. I'm not saying that it gave it a good answer, but it explored it in a way that people hadn't seen before. So that was interesting. It would have been nice to have seen a bit more like that, but then literally that happened, and unfortunately I think it was really low rated. Like, I think people didn't like it, so maybe that's why he chose not to do it. But then they just went straight back to the original format.
Well, see, one thing I will say about like, so Roanoke and also Freak Show, however you want to look at Freak Show, woof, they look at history, whereas seasons like Cult look at like present day issues and say that Anne Frank stuff. Basically, Ryan Murphy has this tendency to like talk about things which are too contemporary and then they age badly. And everyone knows when you actually wait more like 10, 20 years after an event and then talk about it, there's been enough time for there to be more of a cultural idea of it. And you can, you know, you can talk about it more and like do more with something and explore it and have more fun with it. Whereas when something's so contemporary, you're just going to age stuff. Like Cult, probably the most poorly aged season. 100%. Like, it just happened too fast, didn't it? Like, the whole Trump administration, like, it just, I don't know why everyone was so fast to jump on things. It's not just Ryan Murphy, but whatever. I think a season like Cult could have worked better a few years later when you saw more of a ripple effect of that vote and, you know, like what has since happened with that kind of area of the internet. Similar things, say like I say with the Anne Frank stuff, saying he said it's because a lot of women at the time were coming out saying they were Anne Frank and all these different things. And like, you know, there was a lot of discussion of it coming up at the time, but it's like, it's too contemporary. That's my problem with later American Horror Story. It doesn't take time to like be classy. That's like the only word I can think to use. It just like, it lost all sense of like, I don't even know how to explain it, like restraint. You know,
to me, it kind of lost all sense of horror. Like, it really felt like it's so. This is why I think the first, whether you like them or not, I think the first 4 seasons stand out really, really well, because it feeds into like horror tropes. So you had Murder House,
Yeah.
then you had Asylum, and then you had Coven, you know, obviously that was witches, then you had Freak Show, which was a circus. And then after that is when I really felt like he tried to go, like you said, into more, not contemporary exactly, because obviously Hotel wasn't exactly contemporary, but more into like the real life based horror
Yes,
instead of
because
just
Hotel was so
tropes.
massively based on true crime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it lost the kind of campiness that it had. Like American Horror Story,
Well,
it had horrific elements, but it was never one of those things that obviously made me jump or anything like that. It was more it was kind of an interesting study into horror tropes.
yeah, I agree.
You know?
But then this is why, so we've briefly mentioned that Hotel was the one that kind of made a lot of people drop off, which is so interesting because, you know, we've compared to The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead had more of a slow burn drop off. You know, people gradually dropped off throughout a couple of seasons. Hotel, it was like immediate, wasn't it? It was just
Plummet, yeah.
immediately, like the loyal fan base like halved overnight, didn't it? Which was honestly nuts to see. Like, I don't think I've seen anything comparable, really. What I'm trying to get at is that Hotel, like we say, focused on true crime, yeah, didn't really focus on horror tropes or anything, and it still actually at the same time tried to cling on to a bit of its campiness, but it was in such poor taste to like literally have these actors that have done like kind of like comedic horror roles in previous seasons be playing real life killers. Felt so icky. Do you know what, like you couldn't even like, enjoy watching it? You're just so
There
aware.
were, I stopped watching it, but then at some point I must have watched it again, and I don't know when. I think so. I watched American Horror Story as it was being released every season up until Hotel.
Yeah.
And I think Hotel came out when I would have been, I don't know, we would have been about 8, 17.
I think we were literally in our second year of college or first year of uni.
Yeah. So I watched the first episode, and this is one of the 2 episodes, but I watched the first episode, and for people that have seen it, and you will agree, that's when I was like, I'm done. I can't
Too
do this
much, wasn't
anymore.
it?
It was horrific. It wasn't even like, because we've spoken about like films that really push boundaries, especially in this regard, in our banned, cursed and controversial episode from last year. And this was one of the moments where it was like, I'm not saying it needed to serve a purpose, because I don't think it should have been in there at all, but the fact that it didn't obviously made it so much worse.
I completely agree. And it's like, it's funny because it felt like Ryan Murphy was trying to be like boundary pushing and like, you know, kind of like a Wes Craven moment for him, or like trying to be like his Sallow, you know, like something that people are going to be outraged by, but it had something to say. It had nothing to say. So like you say, like, yes, it didn't need a purpose, but at least a purpose could slightly justify it.
He did it because he knew it would make people squirm and probably push the controversy, and it did. And it's
it didn't at the same time, because it got people talking, but in the wrong way, because that was what made loads of people drop off, wasn't it? And then the people that didn't drop off there dropped off fucking later on. So
well, the next episode that was in it that made me like, obviously it didn't make me uncomfortable in the same way, but it was also around a time where we've spoken about all the time desensitization, how I kind of started becoming more aware of just like how in poor taste things were. And it was the serial killer's dinner episode, because it was absolutely horrendous, because it was real life serial killers. It was played, it wasn't even played to be uncomfortable, it was played to be funny. And it wasn't.
It was so horrible.
It was horrendous.
And the worst bit is, as well, to me, it was in such poor taste because, well, you know, it's in poor taste anyway, but this was at the time when there was a lot of discussion over serial killer fandoms on Tumblr. AHS had a big presence on Tumblr. The creators knew it had a big presence on Tumblr. They should have been aware of the fandom that they were feeding into. And it's like, if anything, I feel like they did it on purpose, which is like pretty hideous. Like there's no way they weren't aware of the fact that there was a big crossover between the true crime fandom. And I say fandom because it is a fandom, you know, like they stan serial killers. There's a big crossover between that fandom and AHS's fans. And it's just like, they knew that and they still did that scene. It was so vile. I hated every second of it.
I think this also kind of brings us on to, because I know we're not gonna, like, we don't really have the time to talk about every season in detail. I also know Leanna hasn't seen them all. So it would kind of be pointless. Plus the later seasons, I really don't think anybody cares about that much. But I think this kind of ties into just the brief moment we wanted to mention, obviously the new Dharma series that's come out, and how just you bringing up the fact that there are serial killer fandoms, and it's horrific. A friend of mine was watching the show, and they said that they were really excited for the show because Jeffrey Dahmer was their favorite serial killer. And I thought at first I'd misheard, because I was like, oh, you know, a lot of people were watching it because it was Ryan Murphy and it was Evan Peters. You know, they hadn't worked together in a while. I know that Evan Peters did return to the latest season of American Horror Story, but people were excited for them to kind of be working on a project together again. But that's not what was said. And it was again at that moment where I kind of sat back and thought, I don't even think people even realize what they're saying.
No.
And I think that's almost
themselves.
Actually, no, it's worse than if people were just like, I mean, it's bad either way, but it's almost worse than if people were acknowledging that this is horrific and exploitative and still enjoying it. But then this just really shows how desensitized people have become to the fact that
it's real.
What do you mean your favorite serial killer? What the fuck does that mean?
I mean, if you're interested in this topic, we did some episodes last year that were about true crime on Netflix and like true crime adaptions and stuff, where we go a lot more in depth into this whole idea and how like Netflix has a really big part to play in all of this. So essentially the main points we were making there are the same points we're kind of making now, which is that like it's a really complex issue, and you can't just blame the viewers, and you can't just blame the creators of this media, because at the end of the day, there's, you know, it's up to people to consume stuff responsibly, and it's also up to people to make responsible media. And I just think that like this season Hotel was such a nightmare, because it literally it was so irresponsible on both ends, you know. It was irresponsible to make that scene, and then it was irresponsible of people to be like, oh my god, it's so fun seeing all my favorite serial killers in the same scene. It was just so like, I couldn't understand it. Like, I think it was in our second year of college, because I think no, it was in uni. I remember people having conversations about it and being like, oh my god, did you see this? It was nuts. It's like, what are you talking about?
I know I definitely didn't watch Hotel until I was in uni, because I literally watched Hotel and then I watched Cult afterwards. So they were both, I think most of Cult was already out, and obviously Hotel had already been released the year prior. But this is just it. And I mean, like, you know, this was intended to be a mini-sode, so there is so much more we could say about it. And in all honesty, if people wanted to hear like a more in-depth kind of go through the seasons of American Horror Story, I would be happy to do it, because you know, even the later seasons, and I don't just mean from a point of like, you know, the exploitation of it. I would like to go into it about kind of just like horror in general, and how the good and bad things it kind of did for horror, why people still want to watch it. But you know, I think that just for like a mini Halloween episode, we kind of just wanted to throw out there, because we've mentioned American Horror Story a couple of times.
We had to finally just sit and talk about it a bit, you know, because it addresses so many things we talk about, like horror as a genre, and what, you know, TV and how it differs from film, and how you build an audience through TV and like auteurs. I think what's so interesting, say, with American Horror Story, you've got like a television auteur. Like, I don't think he's an auteur. I think Ryan Murphy's a little shit, but like he's one of the closest things we have, other than say like David Lynch. And Ryan Murphy's just solely in TV, isn't he, really? But like his shows, man, they're just copy and paste of each other. And it's so interesting, because it's like, how can you go from making like Glee to AHS to that Hollywood show to this new Dharma show and like maintain a fan base throughout it all? Like,
this is the thing, I don't get it, because I have watched a lot of his shows.
Me too.
And every time like a new one gets announced, I'm like intrigued. Like at one point it was excitement, now it's intrigue, because I do why am I rooting for this guy? Why am I actually rooting for him to kind of either go back to his roots, or to kind of do what maybe he should have done in the first place, and realize that, you know, from like 2011 to 2014-15, when we had the first 4 seasons of American Horror Story, those, you know, would have been that would have been a great anthology. Obviously it still had its issues, it was still exploitative,
freak show, but
but it would have been such a good starting point. And then, like, you know, he could have moved on and done things, you know, like Hollywood and things like that, and then maybe we wouldn't have had things like Dharma, but unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's not the way that it
He's
went.
not the like, personally, I don't think that kind of show should exist anyway, but he is the last person that should have been making it, because
And yet he's the exact person I knew that was going to.
yeah, and that's what's sad, isn't it? You know, it's
Mhm.
just like, and of course it's a Netflix show.
Yeah.
Me and Sky had not necessarily planned to watch the whole thing, but we kind of wanted to see what it was about so we could talk about it in this. And Sky, you managed 3 episodes, didn't you?
Mhm.
I couldn't do one. We both probably have very similar reasons for it. And like we said towards the beginning, we don't really want to dive into it too much and contribute. But I do want to say, like, if you've watched the show, we're not like gonna like judge you or anything if you watch any like Ryan Murphy content. Like, everyone watches what they want. But maybe like just be aware of the kind of creator
Mhm.
that, you know, Ryan Murphy is, and
Mhm.
educate yourself on maybe like everything around the show.
I was just gonna say, like, this is one of the times when, like, I know we say a lot, like, obviously we're not going to judge people for what they watch, and that is still the truth. But I think this is one of those times where it would be like, if you are watching the show right now, maybe do stop.
Yeah.
Because maybe you haven't seen all of the commentary going on around it. Like, look into it, you know?
Yeah, that's what I think that's the bare minimum you can do, because if you're
Yeah.
like telling by watching it, you're telling Netflix that the demand is there and you want more shows like this. So you kind of
Mhm.
have to like be aware of what you're doing,
And
especially if
also
you hate watching it, you know?
yeah, we don't even have time to go into the fact that it got tagged with the LGBT tag originally.
Oh, and you just
There
know
is
that's
so
because of Ryan
much.
Murphy's involvement. I could go on
Yeah.
forever about Ryan Murphy in the LGBT community and like
That's,
media
do
and
you know
everything.
what? Maybe in the future we
Maybe
will,
that'll be
because
its own episode,
yeah,
honestly.
we're never going to do a full episode on the Dharma series because neither of us are going to watch it. We
Not a
just knew that
chance.
we couldn't talk about Ryan Murphy and not bring
Acknowledge it.
up what's going on around it. But yeah, maybe at some point we do need to go into just not even American Horror Story, just Ryan Murphy in general.
I think that could be a very interesting episode if the
Yeah.
demand is there from
Mhm.
viewers and listeners. So
Yeah.
if you've enjoyed this episode, please let us know. And please let us know if you want an episode on Ryan Murphy, because honestly, we'd eat it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really enjoy talking about American Horror Story, and like, yes, this, like you said, it's just a mini-sode. I'd love to
Mhm.
talk about it more, but it honestly gets me a bit wound up.
I
So
think
like, I
that's
feel
it
like a
though,
mini-sode
yeah.
is probably the best thing to do, because like,
Because
if
we
we did
need
a
to
full
keep
length episode,
ourselves.
I'd be like this.
Yeah, this has been a bit all over the place. But I think we got the main points out that we wanted to. And I feel like at some point, you know, keep an eye out sometime next year. I think there will be American Horror Story and then maybe also a Ryan Murphy episode out
Yeah.
at some point, because there's a lot to say. There's a lot to kind of take apart with it. And
Yeah.
like I said, love him or hate him, love or hate American Horror Story, both big points in history that I think did change things.
Yeah, of
And those are the
course.
things that I think, you know, we want to talk a bit more about. But
I
yeah, for
yeah.
now, those are it's basically, those are our very kind of rushed, mixed up thoughts on American Horror Story. And yeah, if you've enjoyed, please like, subscribe, all that stuff, and keep an eye out because we still have Halloween episodes to come for this year. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it for today. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.